In 1874, a trail cook, whose name nobody bothered to write down, fed 32 men across 800 miles of the Chisholm Trail on a budget of 11 cents per man per day. The cattle company recorded his daily costs. They did not record his name. What he fed those men isn't what you've been told. No steaks, no frontier romance. One pot, one fire, and whatever fit in a wooden box bolted to the back of a wagon. Meals so effective that the men who ate them outperformed every nutritional standard the U.S. Army later tried to replace them with. Something the Army documented in its own records and buried in a footnote that was never cited publicly again. These 25 meals fed the American West. Then they were replaced, not because something better came along, but because specific companies, funded reports, and coordinated advertising campaigns made sure they were, and made a great deal of money in the process. Number 8 was eaten by men who had no idea they were maintaining gut health that modern gastroenterology is still trying to replicate. Number 13 was pushed out after a single advertising campaign convinced Americans it was poverty food, while the company behind that campaign made 4 times more profit on what replaced it. And number 1 was the meal that appeared when a trail boss wanted to remind his men they were human beings, not equipment. We're counting down from 25. Here's what they don't tell you about any of it. Number 25, Ashcake. Before the chuck wagon existed, cowboys baked in the coals, cornmeal, water, and salt. That's it. They mixed the dough, shaped it flat, wrapped it in wet corn husks if they could find them, and buried it in hot ash at the edge of the fire. 30 minutes. Then they brushed off the gray crust and ate. No pan, no grease, no equipment beyond fire and earth. This technique didn't originate with cowboys. It came from Plains Indian cooks who had perfected it over centuries. The cowboy cooks learned it because it worked, adopted it because they had no alternative, and used it because cornmeal ran about 2 cents a pound in 1870s supply towns. 1 bag kept a man fed for 2 weeks. The outside blackened. The inside stayed dense and slightly sweet. Men tore pieces and ate them with dried beef, or dunked them in whatever stew was nearby. No plates, no washing up. You ate and got back to work. That's not desperation, that's efficiency. And the difference matters more than most people realize. Number 24, Sowbelly and greens. Salt pork rode in every chuck wagon from Texas to Kansas. Cowboys called it Sowbelly. It cost almost nothing, kept for months without refrigeration, and it transformed every pot it entered. A good trail cook diced a 1/4 pound, rendered it until the fat melted clear, then added whatever wild greens grew near the water source. Lamb's quarter, dandelion, mustard weed. Plants that modern foragers charge $15 a pound for at farmers' markets, because nothing else was growing nearby and somebody had to feed the crew. The greens wilted into the fat until they turned silky and deeply savory. The liquid at the bottom, dark, salty, thick, got eaten with cornbread soaked in it. Not a drop wasted. Here's the part that doesn't get mentioned. Nutritional science has since confirmed that rendered animal fat and bitter greens together create fat-soluble vitamin absorption that eating either alone can't match. Cowboys eating Sowbelly and greens were getting more from their food than men at hotel tables eating beefsteak. They didn't know the mechanism. They knew it worked. That was enough. It always was. Number 23, pot liquor soup. When the Sowbelly pot had been eaten down to scraps, the liquid left behind became the next meal. Dark, salty, thick with dissolved nutrients from the greens. Cowboys called it pot liquor. They added dried beans and a handful of cornmeal stirred in to thicken. Then let the whole pot simmer low for an afternoon while the herd rested. What came out tasted like it had been cooking for a week, because in a sense, it had. This was cumulative cooking, a rolling pot that never fully emptied, just replenished. The flavor built with every use. Every previous meal contributed to the next one. Modern kitchens pour this down the drain every single day. The cowboys knew they were throwing away the best part. We forgot, and nobody reminded us because there was no money in reminding us. Number 22. Jackrabbit stew. Jackrabbits were everywhere on the open range, lean, tough, and if you didn't know what you were doing, they cooked up dry and stringy. Most people didn't know what they were doing. A good camp cook knew the answer: low and slow in the Dutch oven. Brown the pieces hard in rendered fat. Add water, dried onion, salt, pepper. A pinch of cayenne if the cook was feeling generous. Seal the lid, set the pot on coals for 2 hours. What came out was tender enough to fall from the bone. The tough connective tissue dissolved into a rich, almost gelatinous gravy. 1 jackrabbit fed 6 hungry men. That's the mathematics of the open range. Make do, waste nothing, feed everyone. And when the cattle drives ended and men moved into towns, that mathematics went with them. The knowledge of how to turn a tough, cheap ingredient into a meal worth eating belonged to people who had no margin for error. When the margin appeared, the knowledge started disappearing. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when survival stops being the requirement. Number 21. Sourdough flapjacks. The sourdough starter was treated with more care than the horses. Lose the herd and the boss docks your pay. Lose the sourdough mother, and you face a mutiny. That's not a figure of speech. Cattle drive employment records from the Chisholm Trail era document cooks being replaced mid-drive after losing their starter, not fired for cause. Replaced because the starter mattered more than the disruption. Chuck wagon cooks mixed sourdough with cornmeal or flour every morning before dawn. Thick batter onto a cast-iron skillet, greased with the rind of Sowbelly. The flapjacks hit the pan with a sigh and a sizzle. Rose in the cold morning air until the bubbles broke on top and the edges set dry. Flipped once, served in stacks with molasses. A cowboy ate 4 or 5 before climbing into the saddle for a 12-hour day. The sourdough fermentation provided B vitamins. The molasses provided iron. The fat provided sustained energy. No protein shake, no performance bar. A pan, a fire, and a cook who understood his men needed fuel before sunup. It worked. So, eventually, someone found a way to sell a replacement. Number 20. Wild onion and potato hash. Potatoes were the one fresh vegetable that survived a cattle drive. Hardy, calorie-dense, willing to sit in a sack for weeks without complaint. Cowboys diced them rough, threw them into a skillet with rendered fat and wild onions pulled from creek beds, and cooked them hard until the edges blistered and browned. Salt, pepper, patience. But something happened in that pan. The natural sugars in the potato caramelized against the iron. The wild onions sweetened. The dish became greater than its parts. Cowboys ate this for breakfast, lunch, and supper without complaint. Period medical records from Army examinations of trail hands document daily caloric expenditure exceeding that of modern marathon runners. These men needed this. It delivered. That's not a small thing. That's competence, and competence, it turns out, doesn't protect anything. Number 19. Pemmican stew. Cowboys learned this from the Plains Indians and the mountain men who came before them. Pemmican, dried meat, pounded fine and mixed with rendered tallow and dried berries until it formed a dense, waxy cake. On its own, it kept for years without spoiling. Dropped into boiling water with dried corn and wild turnips. It became a stew that could sustain a man through conditions that would stop a modern hiker cold. Native American warriors survived on pemmican alone for weeks during winter hunts. Cowboys discovered what nutritional science wouldn't formally document for another century. Fat isn't the enemy. It's the fuel. That knowledge is obvious now. It wasn't obvious in 1880, and the people who decided what Americans should eat after 1900 had a very strong financial interest in keeping it that way. Fat-dense, self-sustaining foods don't require supply chains. They don't generate quarterly revenue. They can't be branded. And a food you can't brand is a food that doesn't make anyone rich. That's a business model. And it worked. Number 18. dried apple stack cake. Sugar traveled in tight-lidded tins and was rationed like medicine. Too expensive, too fragile, too valuable to use freely. But dried apples were cheap at any supply town, and a trail cook who knew what he was doing could turn them into something that made men go quiet. He'd rehydrate the apples in a small amount of water, mash them with whatever spices he had, and layer them between flat rounds of sourdough cake baked in a Dutch oven, 5 or 6 layers. Wrap the whole thing in a clean cloth. Leave it overnight. By morning, the moisture from the apples had softened every layer into something that sliced clean. Chuck Wagon cook pay records from Texas cattle companies show that dessert-capable cooks commanded 15 to 20% higher wages than those who couldn't produce sweets. The market had already measured exactly what this skill was worth. Men who had been weeks without anything sweet went quiet eating this. Men who argued over everything fell silent. Hunger is a precise instrument, and a cook who understood it held real power, the kind that doesn't show up in the cattle company's ledger. Number 17. Molasses and biscuits. Molasses was the sweetener of the American frontier, cheaper than sugar, longer lasting than honey, calorie dense in the way a man burning 4,000 calories a day required. Every chuck wagon carried a jug, black, thick, heavy. At the end of a long day, the cook set a pan of sourdough biscuits and a tin of molasses on the tailgate. Cowboys poured the syrup and ate, standing up, still dusty from the herd. Molasses provided iron, calcium, and B vitamins. The sourdough biscuits delivered fermented grain with better bioavailability than the refined white bread entering eastern cities at the same time. A cowboy eating this at sunset was accidentally eating something nutritionally superior to what wealthy men in Boston were sitting down to for dinner. The frontier fed people better than refinement did. That's a documented nutritional fact, and it's one the food industry has spent 150 years making difficult to say out loud. Number 16. Hardtack skillet. Hardtack was flour, water, and salt, baked until virtually indestructible. It lasted indefinitely if kept dry. It was despised by every man who ever chewed one straight, but a camp cook with ingenuity didn't serve hardtack straight. He broke it into a skillet with rendered fat and water, let it absorb and soften, then fried it hard on both sides until it held its shape like a patty. Salt, pepper, a slice of Sowbelly alongside. Suddenly, hardtack was a meal. The Army called it emergency rations. The Cowboys figured out how to make it edible. The Army took notes on neither, and that's where it gets uncomfortable. In 1898, the U.S. Army Surgeon General's office commissioned a formal study of cowboy trail diets. The conclusion was already decided before the first page was written. They classified the diet, beans, salt pork, cornmeal, rendered fat, as nutritionally deficient. Too much fat, too little variety, inadequate for sustained military performance. That classification was used to justify awarding processed ration contracts to Armour and Company, Swift and Company, and the Consolidated Fruit Jar Company. Combined contract value, over $1.2 million in 1899 money. Here's what the report buried in an appendix. Trail hands averaged 180 days in the saddle annually, performing labor that modern sports medicine classifies as extreme endurance work. They did it on beans, salt pork, and cornmeal, without a single supplement. The men who subsequently ate the Army's improved rations reported lower energy and higher illness rates in regimental field records from the Philippines campaign. The contracts get renewed anyway. The appendix is never cited publicly again. Number 15. Prairie Oyster Scramble. This one made greenhorns hesitate and veterans laugh. When calves were branded on the trail, the removed testicles went straight into the camp skillet. Wasting nothing wasn't philosophy on the open range. It was economics, enforced by the simple fact that there was nothing else. A cook would split them, dust them in cornmeal, and fry them in hot tallow until the outside turned crisp and golden. Served with scrambled eggs if the wagon had them. Eaten plain with a splash of vinegar if it didn't. Mild flavor, rich texture. Protein content documented higher per pound than most cuts of muscle meat. Branding days became the best eating on a long drive because of this one dish. Cowboys who refused on their first drive ate them eagerly on their third. That's not a punchline. That's what happens when pride becomes expensive and hunger becomes the teacher. Number 14. Cattleman's burgoo. Burgoo is the forgotten ancestor of every great American stew. It started as a Kentucky hunting dish, spread through Civil War mess halls where soldiers threw everything available into one pot, and arrived on the cattle trails in the 1870s as the solution to a specific problem. What do you do with every partial ingredient left in the wagon before you hit a supply town? Everything. That was the answer. Dried beans sitting since Monday, a heel of Sowbelly, wild onions, the last of the cornmeal stirred in to thicken, a jackrabbit shot that morning. Whatever the land offered alongside whatever the wagon still carried, cooked together low and slow for half a day. Charles Siringo, in his 1885 trail memoir, A Texas Cowboy, documents this practice by name on panhandle drives. Men who had been riding since 4 in the morning gathered around a pot that smelled like nothing identifiable and tasted like everything worth gathering for. Burgoo had no recipe. It was a philosophy. Use everything, waste nothing, feed the men. That philosophy built the American West, and it didn't survive the 20th century with its name intact. Number 13. Cornmeal mush. Before oatmeal came in decorated boxes with smiling Quakers on the label, the American frontier ran on cornmeal mush, 1 cup of coarse ground cornmeal, 3 cups of water, a pinch of salt. Bring to a boil, stir until thick, simmer 20 minutes. Eaten soft for breakfast at 4 in the morning with black coffee, that's a meal a man could work 12 hours on without feeling the bottom fall out. The remainder set up in the pan while the herd moved, then got sliced and fried in tallow for supper, edges crisp and golden. Same ingredient. 2 different meals, 1 pot. That's not poverty, that's precision. And here's what happened to it. Before the campaign ran, a chuck wagon cook stirred cornmeal mush every morning with the same wooden spoon he'd carried since Texas. It was just breakfast. It was just Tuesday. After the campaign, that same meal became something to be ashamed of. In 1887, the Washburn-Crosby Company, the grain milling operation that would later become General Mills, began running a coordinated newspaper advertising campaign in Midwestern and Eastern markets. The campaign had one target: cornmeal. It ran in the Chicago Tribune and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The message was consistent across every ad. Cornmeal was poverty food, crude, rural, shameful, the food of people who didn't know any better. At the same time, Washburn-Crosby was expanding its gold medal flour distribution network across the same markets. Flour generated 340% higher margin per pound than cornmeal at wholesale. By 1900, cornmeal consumption in urban American households had dropped by more than half. The Cowboys, eating cornmeal mush twice a day, were consuming a food with documented superior micronutrient density to the refined white flour that replaced it. They were eating correctly. The advertising told Americans they were eating like poor people. Americans believed the advertising. Number 12. Stale biscuit bread pudding. Nothing left the chuck wagon as waste? When biscuits went hard and stale after a day, as sourdough always did, the cook collected them, broke them into a Dutch oven, and poured in water. Condensed milk if the wagon carried it. Sugar if any remained. Dried fruit. Coals below, coals on the lid, 40 minutes. What came out was dense and sweet, the biscuits having absorbed every drop of liquid, the top browned and slightly crusty. Cowboys ate it warm from the pot. No plates, no ceremony. You took your portion and went back to work. But for a few minutes, sitting by a fire in the dark of the Texas Panhandle with a bowl of warm pudding, a man might almost feel like something beyond a tool for moving cattle across a continent. That feeling mattered. The cooks who understood it were the ones who kept their crews together through the worst of the drives. Number 11. Vinegar pie. No lemons on a chuck wagon, no cream past the first supply town, but vinegar kept indefinitely, and sugar traveled in sealed tins. A trail cook mixed sugar, flour, water, and a generous pour of apple cider vinegar, cooked it until it thickened into a tart, glossy filling, and poured it into a sourdough crust baked in the Dutch oven. It tasted like lemon pie to men who hadn't eaten anything sweet in 3 weeks. The tartness of vinegar tricked the brain into perceiving something far more refined than what it was. Cowboys didn't care what they were being tricked into. They cared that the cook had made something sweet at the end of a hard day. This is ingenuity at its most precise, making luxury from poverty, making something from nothing. That was the cowboy way of cooking. It didn't require a supply chain. That was the problem. Number 10. Dutch oven bread. The Dutch oven was the most important piece of equipment on the cattle trail. Thick-walled cast iron, legs so it could sit over coals, a flanged lid so coals could be piled on top. It turned every campfire into a functional oven, heat from below, heat from above, controllable by adjusting the coal beds. A good trail cook could bake bread in it that rivaled what came out of a proper bakehouse. Sourdough mixed, left to rise in the shade of the wagon during the morning ride, set into a greased Dutch oven in the afternoon. An hour later, a golden loaf with a crackling crust and a soft, tangy interior. Fresh bread on the open range. It sounds impossible. It wasn't. It was simply a matter of knowing how to use what you had. That knowledge took years to develop. You had to understand your fire, your cast iron, your dough, your altitude, your weather. There was no recipe that covered all of it. There was only judgment, the kind that comes from experience and accountability. Judgment can't be packaged and sold. That's the only reason it disappeared. Number 9. Trail chili. Real trail chili has no beans. That's not a regional preference. It's a historical fact. Cowboys carried dried chilies, whole, not ground. Dried beef or fresh butchered meat. Rendered fat, wild garlic. The meat was cut small and fried hard in tallow until browned. The dried chilies were soaked in water and ground by hand. Anchos for depth, chipotles for smoke, arbol for heat. Each one used separately, each for a different purpose in the same pot. Water added, 2-hour simmer. What emerged was thick, dark red, deeply spiced, and complex in a way that modern chili powder simply cannot replicate. That's not preference, that's chemistry. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. In 1894, William Gebhardt, a German immigrant operating a cafe in New Braunfels, Texas, began importing and grinding dried ancho chilies through a hand-operated meat grinder. By 1899, he had industrialized the process and was selling packaged chili powder nationally under the Gebhardt Eagle brand. The problem wasn't the convenience. The problem was what got destroyed in the process. Gebhardt's grinder combined chili varieties that vaqueros and cowboy cooks had always used separately, each for different heat levels, different flavors, different purposes in the pot, into a single uniform powder, then added cumin and salt to mask the loss of complexity. By 1920, his approach had been replicated by a dozen competitors. The regional knowledge of which dried chili did what, built over generations of cooking in the Southwest, had effectively disappeared from mainstream American kitchens. The replacement required no knowledge. It delivered a fraction of the flavor. It sold in volumes that made Gebhardt a millionaire. The men whose cooking tradition it was built on never see a dollar. That's not progress. That's extraction. Number 8. Salt pork and beans. This is the meal that appears in every diary, every memoir, every account of life on the cattle drives. And almost nobody makes it the way it was made. Dried beans soaked overnight in creek water, salt pork diced and rendered in the bottom of the Dutch oven until the fat ran clear. Soaked beans added with enough water to cover by 2 inches. Lid sealed. hot set in a bed of coals and left for 6 to 8 hours. What happened inside that sealed pot was a slow transformation. The collagen in the salt pork dissolved into the bean liquid. The bean skins softened until they nearly disappeared. The fat coated every surface until the whole thing became one unified, deeply savory mass. Here's what no one in 1875 could have told you, but food science has since documented. The slow heat in a sealed cast iron environment produces anaerobic cooking conditions that generate short-chain fatty acid compounds similar to those found in fermented foods. Cowboys eating salt pork and beans every night were maintaining gut health that modern gastroenterology is only recently able to measure. They didn't know the mechanism. They didn't need to. They knew it worked. We replaced it with a product in a can, called it convenient. It's not the same thing. Number 7, Mulligan stew. Mulligan stew is the stew of the broke and the wandering. Any meat, any vegetable, any grain that could be found, gathered, shot, or traded, it went in the pot. No rules, no recipe. One rule, waste nothing. 2 jackrabbit legs, a handful of dried beans, 3 potatoes, a knuckle of Sowbelly, 4 men through a cold night. The mathematics of scarcity always worked in a good mulligan. This meal traveled forward in time. Trail hands between jobs, cowboys in the off-season, Depression-era hobos moving between camps, they all lived on Mulligan. The name changed depending on who was telling the story. The logic never changed. That's not just resourcefulness. That's a durable answer to a question that doesn't go away. The food industry's answer to that same question cost $7 for a can of soup that a chuck wagon cook would have used as a base. Number 6, sourdough biscuits. The sourdough mother rode in a covered crock, lashed to the chuck wagon. The cook protected it with a ferocity usually reserved for ammunition and whiskey. A good sourdough biscuit from the open range came out of the Dutch oven golden, risen to twice its raw height, tangy from fermentation, with a structure that held together when you split it. Butter if there was any, molasses if there wasn't. Plain if neither could be found. The fermentation process that specialty bakeries charge $8 a loaf for was the free daily bread of the American frontier. Cowboys never called it artisan, they called it Tuesday. Here's what replaced it, and this part is specifically documented. Fleischmann's commercial yeast was introduced at the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. Rumford baking powder expanded aggressively through the same decade. Both products required purchased inputs. Both eliminated the need for a maintained starter. Both generated ongoing revenue that a self-sustaining sourdough culture simply could not. A sourdough starter, once established, costs nothing to maintain. You feed it flour and water. It produces bread indefinitely. That's not a viable business model. So it was replaced by one that was. Number 5, spotted pup. Every cattle drive had a cook who knew how to make spotted pup, and those cooks were legends. Rice cooked low and slow in the Dutch oven with dried raisins and condensed milk or just water and sugar if nothing else was available, turned into a sweet, sticky pudding. The raisins dotted across the surface like spots on the back of a pup. Rice lasted indefinitely and cooked in one pot with minimal water. On its own, it was fuel. Spotted pup was something else. It was morale. A Dutch oven of spotted pup appearing at the end of a hard week told men that the cook cared, that someone was paying attention to whether they were human beings or moving parts in a cattle operation. That attention mattered in ways that didn't show up in the cattle company's ledger, but showed up in crew retention, in willingness to push through hard conditions, in the simple fact that men came back for the next drive. The cooks who made spotted pup kept their jobs. Cowboys voted with their appetites. They always did. Number 4, son of a gun stew. When a calf was butchered on the trail, nothing was wasted. The heart, the liver, the tongue, the kidneys, the sweetbreads, all of it diced fine and stewed together in a Dutch oven with onions and chilies and whatever else the wagon carried. Cowboys called it son of a gun stew in polite company. They used a different name among themselves. The marrow gut was the most prized ingredient, a tube of fat and organ tissue from just weaned calves that melted into the stew and gave it a richness no muscle meat could match. Trail bosses ate from the same pot as the lowest hand, not out of principle, out of appetite. Everyone wanted the cook's generous ladle. Social hierarchy dissolved over a good pot, a meal so extraordinary that rank and dignity were temporarily suspended in the interest of getting a second helping. That's what real food does. That's what it's always done. Number 3, Cowboy coffee. It's not a meal on its own, but there isn't a single meal on this list that existed without it, so it earns its place. A full handful of coarse grounds per person, cold water poured over, brought to a full boil, then a splash of cold water thrown in to settle the grounds to the bottom. Black, always black. No sugar unless a man had earned it. No cream because cream didn't survive past the first supply town. The caffeine in camp coffee, brewed this way, runs significantly stronger than drip method coffee. Longer extraction time, higher heat, direct contact between grounds and water. Early extraction chemistry research from the same era documented this. Cowboys were brewing a more fully extracted, more potent cup. Then someone decided that was a problem. In 1896, J.A. Folger and Company began running a sustained advertising campaign in Eastern newspapers and women's magazines. The target wasn't a competitor, it was a method. The campaign used illustrated depictions of cowboys and frontiersmen as cautionary figures, men who boiled coffee in open pots because they didn't know any better. The subtext wasn't subtle. Civilized Americans bought Folger's pre-ground. Uncivilized ones boiled it in a pot over a fire. The campaign ran for 11 years. The irony, documented in extraction chemistry research from the same period, is that the boiling method produced stronger caffeine extraction and fuller development of the coffee's natural compounds than the drip method Folgers was promoting. The Cowboys were brewing better coffee. How many times does the same pattern have to show up before it stops being a coincidence? Every meal on this list, every single one. Something works, someone figures out how to sell a replacement. The replacement is inferior, the marketing is better, the original disappears. That's not accident, that's a system. Number 2, the end of week everything stew. This meal had no name, every drive had it, every cook made it. Nobody wrote it down because there was nothing to write. It was different every time, built from whatever remained at the end of the week. The calculation was always the same. What can still be stretched? What won't survive another week on a rattling wagon? What can be combined so nothing is wasted? Old beans, the heel of the Sowbelly, dried corn, whatever dried herbs remained, a handful of flour stirred in to thicken, water to cover, lid sealed, pot buried in coals. The stew cooked while camp was broken, while the herd was gathered, while everything that needed doing was done. It was ready when it needed to be ready. Experienced trail hands could tell by smell alone what day of the week it was being made. This meal required no recipe because it required judgment, the kind built over years of working with almost nothing and being accountable for 12 mouths. Judgment can't be packaged. That was always the problem. Number 1, son of a gun in a sack. The greatest one-pot meal the American West ever produced was not elegant. Its real name wasn't printable in newspapers until well into the 20th century. Rendered beef fat mixed with flour, dried fruit, molasses, and whatever spices the wagon carried, wrapped tight in a cloth sack and dropped into a pot of boiling water for 3 hours. When the sack was unwrapped, what emerged was dense, dark, sweet, and savory at once. A pudding that required no baking equipment beyond a pot, a fire, and patience. It appeared at the end of cattle drives, at Christmas camps when men were far from any family, when a trail boss wanted to mark something worth marking. The cook who could make it held a different standing from other cooks, not because of the technique was simple enough, because of what the technique represented. He understood that feeding men was not just about calories. It was about reminding them, men covered in trail dust in the middle of the American wilderness, men who had been pushing cattle 16 hours a day for months, that they deserved something someone had taken real trouble over. That understanding built the American West, not the cattle companies, not the railroad men who came after, not the food corporations who followed. The cooks, 25 meals, 1 pot each, 1 fire. Every single one of them worked. That's not the disputed part. The Army knew it, the meat packing companies knew it, the grain millers and the coffee roasters and the chili powder manufacturers knew it. That's why they needed to replace it, not because something better existed, because something more profitable did. The men who cooked these meals didn't leave much behind. No brands, no patents, no funded reports with their names on them. They left the meals. Try one this week. Salt pork and beans if you want to understand what the fuss was about. Vinegar pie if you want to be surprised. Spotted pup if you just need something a cowboy called a celebration. And when someone tells you that the way people used to eat was crude or primitive or nutritionally deficient, ask them who paid for that study. Because somebody always did. The people who lived this way knew exactly what they were doing. 1 pot, 1 fire, 12 men, 400 miles from the nearest town. That was dinner. Turns out, that was enough. We just decided it wasn't.